This special episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Red Sky Morning, the seventh novel in the James Reese Terminal List series. It is coming in hot on May 14th in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. Go to officialjackcar.com to pre-order your copy today. Welcome to the Danger Close podcast. My guest today is my friend, Sean Parnell. He's been on the podcast before, as I've been on his. He's the author of Outlaw Platoon, and Outlaw Platoon is one of, if not the best book that I've ever read that really takes you into what it felt like to be on the ground in Afghanistan. So I think this book really captures what it was like for so many people. And obviously this is your experience, but this right here captures what it was like for so many people over a 20-year period. So Sean is also a former congressional candidate and has a podcast. We're going to get into all that. But man, thank you so much. This is my favorite part of doing the podcast, is that we get to catch up.
Yeah, brother. It's great to see you, man. It's great to see you. And thanks for that cool intro. And you have a hardcover of Outlaw Platoon. I can't even find hardcovers of that book. It's crazy.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. 2012. And we met right after this thing came out. We met in 2013. Unfortunately, it wasn't under the best circumstances on the bus on the way to Chris Kyle's memorial in Texas. But we'll get into all that, though. But I want to start off because people who haven't, for some reason, someone hasn't watched your podcast or didn't listen to our last one, take me to the morning of September 11th, because that was a pretty pivotal morning for you and would lead into what you write about here in Outlaw Platoon.
Yeah, boy. I think back about that time in my life, and so much of it just seems surreal, almost like a fever dream. Can't believe that I lived through that time. But September 11th, right? Like, I was a nothing burger college kid. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I was an elementary education major, but a student taught second grade for a few weeks, and I realized instantly that maybe teaching kids, probably like little kids, is probably not for me. It was rewarding, but it was also challenging. And so I changed my major. So like many college kids, like I was a freshman, sophomore at the time. And I mean, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. And Jack, what's crazy about this is that my college roommates, who were all great guys, they all played football. I did not, but they all did. And we had talked just the night before about how our generation, really our generation, Jack, had it pretty easy. Like, I grew up in the 80s, under Ronald Reagan, and then George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton. The 90s felt like a golden age. I mean, in our country. I mean, this was at a time where our budget was close to balanced. I mean, it's that crazy. And so we just had this conversation. Like, we had it pretty easy. We haven't had this, seminal moment in our lives where everything was thrown into a crossroads, and like where we had to actually choose what path we would take. And so I'm a college, we have this weird drinking and talking, and there was a party at our house, and I like wake up on, like, we had this living room, right, where everybody would come in, and we had like the keg, a typical college party, and there were like cigarette butts all over the floor and stuff. I mean, yeah, it was a different, it was a crazy party. And I just remember like waking up on this couch and blinking my eyes open, and I mean, I just had like this earth-shattering headache, and sat up, and like world was spinning, and I'm like looking around and seeing the remnants of the party the night before. And, I'm staggering over to the television set, half awake, turn it on, and it's like one of those box televisions, right? And watch this TV flicker to life, and just in time to see an airplane crash into the World Trade Center. And Jack, man, looking back, right? Like, I remember exactly where I was, what I was doing, what I was wearing, like what classes I had that day. I experienced watching 9/11 unfold on a television set, and I experienced this range of different emotions, oscillating back and forth between just fear and just righteous indignation and anger. And the fear came from a place, and I don't know if you remember this, Jack, but back then, people thought that 9/11 was just going to be like the opening salvo of a much larger attack. Like, they thought, like, what is there going to be, like some Russian horde storming down the streets of New York City or something? Like, and I mean, we just didn't know what we didn't know back then. World Trade Centers and then Pentagon and then Somerset, Pennsylvania, planes going down. And it was just a crazy day. And right then and there, and I don't remember, I remember thinking what my mom used to tell me, and two most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day that you figure out why. And someday, Sean, you'll figure out like what you're intended to do, what path you're supposed to walk. Just keep trying to do the right thing for the right reasons. I was really lucky to come from a household with two just great parents. Not times weren't always easy, but we had two great parents. And I just resolved to, in that moment, Jack, I just believed that I knew exactly why God had put me on this earth, and that was to serve this country. And I believed that, like a naive 20-something-year-old kid, right? Like I just believed that with that American flag on your shoulder and the might and power of the United States military at your back, I could conquer anything put before me. And I wanted to be a part of America's collective response. I wanted to get in the fight right away. I mean, I wanted to join the infantry because I wanted to be on the front lines. And watching Band of Brothers was something that I've always loved that series. And Band of Brothers came out in, I think, 2001. And
I think it was supposed to premiere like right around that time, I think.
Yes. And so the infantry, and there's something just about the infantry, about being in the trenches, front towards enemy, and the ultimate test that was, I there's something about that nested within my soul that I felt like I just had to do. And of course, wanted to go to airborne school and ranger school and check all those blocks. And then I ended up like going home and talked to my parents about it, Jack. And we got in like this huge, my dad and I got in this huge knockdown drag out argument because my dad was a Naval Academy guy. Now he left the Naval Academy prior to graduating. But he was, it was a conversation because I wanted to get in the fight right away. I wanted to enlist. And he's like, wait a second. No, you don't understand the military, right? There's a non-commissioned officer, there's enlisted non-commissioned officer, and then there's officer corps. Like you're halfway through college, Sean, just stick with it. And of course, being a 20-something-year-old idiot, I was like yelling at him. I'm like, what are you talking about? Our country was just attacked. I want to get in the fight right away. And my father was like, no, the war will still be there in 2 years, Sean, trust me. Because I think everybody had a general sense, Jack, that like our country was changed forever. And 9/11 put us on a path that we haven't really returned from, Jack. I mean, there's been a domino effect after 9/11 that's really shaped the very soul of our country and the way that we think about the world, certainly our generation. And I remember saying to my dad as we were driving back up to Clarion University, and that's where I went. It was a small university in Western Pennsylvania, state school. Driving up in the middle of the night, it was a couple-hour drive. And I just remember saying to my dad when we was all quiet, I'm like, Dad, I just want to serve my country. We were just attacked. I just want to get it in the fight. I said, and what have you ever done to be proud of in your life? You quit the Naval Academy. And so my dad didn't say anything. And that's kind of how I realized that I crossed a line, when you kind of get that look from your dad or your mom, and maybe there's some disappointment there. And he just paused for a while and he said, Sean, I have, 4 things that I'm most proud of in the world. And that is you, your younger sister, and your 2 younger brothers. And come to find out that, he ended up leaving the Naval Academy because of me. And he told me, and I will never forget this. He said, I just didn't want to be a dad that, because he was an aircraft carrier guy, was going to be on aircraft carriers, like spent time on the Nimitz and everything else. Now he's a contractor, or he's retired now, but was a contractor and helping to build nuclear reactors for subs and aircraft carriers. But he said to me, I just didn't want to say to my kid, like, hey, have a good first grade year. I'll see you in second grade. And I took his advice and stayed in school and became an officer and never looked back.
It's interesting that your dad had that foresight saying that, hey, the war will still be here in a few years, because for me and my crew, we were already deployed to Guam, and our the up to that point since Vietnam, we had flashpoints. So we thought, okay, we have Desert One, we have Grenada, we have Panama, first Gulf War, but these flash Mogadishu. So these flashpoints that if you missed them, you missed them. If you're at the wrong team, you weren't going. And so we thought this was going to be kind of the same thing. And we thought, oh, we're so lucky to be deployed right now because we're going right into the fight. We ended up going to Kuwait and doing shipboardings, and Team 3 went to Afghanistan, but I ended up in Afghanistan the following year. But we thought it was going to be over because that was the thing. It's like, oh, flashpoint since Vietnam. We're going to go in there, take care of this, and be done. And everybody that we knew back in the States, at the SEAL teams back in the States, were like, oh, man, we're not deployed. We're going to miss this thing. And obviously that fear was unfounded, but your dad had great foresight to realize that probably because he had more experience and realized the folly of large bureaucracies and governments and how we were just going to stumble into this thing that probably should have been a flashpoint, but instead we're going to drag this thing out for 20 years.
Well, yeah. And it's like, how many, I was a 22-year-old kid. I thought I knew everything. Clearly I didn't. And, my time in the military so often was, this is really like it's cliche, but the whole phrase, be careful what you wish for. Being in the infantry, there were many times where I'm like laying in the mud, in the rain, on an observation post, calling for fire, freezing my ass off, thinking like, oh my gosh, man, like, be careful what you wish for. And I asked for this, and I think my dad had a sense of that. And your point about flashpoints, so that's sort of what I was talking about how it changed our country forever. Like it was flashpoints right all over the place. And even sort of for your experience, and it wasn't. I ended up being in Iraq, Afghanistan, and all over the place for decades, man. It was just crazy, a crazy time.
Yeah, I mean, your dad had that foresight, and I mean, you could have joined the military on September 11th, and then retired essentially at the end. Done a whole career only. I mean, wild. How was what was your first introduction to the military? Like OCS morning, them coming in yelling at you out of the racks, the whole thing. Like, what are your memories of that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Because I was already halfway through school, back then the Army had 4-year scholarship options for ROTC and 2-year. So I applied to the 2-year scholarship option, got accepted, and they send you to like a very condensed version of basic training. So not what was typically for the Army a 9-week basic training is 5, I think, for officers. And the philosophy was, hey, you guys want to be officers, like you better get this stuff straight. You should be able to get it straight than an 18-year-old enlisted kid. That's just at least the philosophy. And whether or not it's true, I don't know. But I ended up going to Fort Knox, like very first experience with the military, just sent in to like drill sergeants and basic training, just like a young private. And the thought process and philosophy, Jack, is that, okay, so 4-year ROTC students don't have to go to basic training because they're going to learn, the rank structure, the drill and ceremony, the culture in those first 2 years. Well, we got to catch these 2-year scholarship kids up. And so that was the philosophy. So I spent that summer after I got accepted into the ROTC program at Fort Knox. And then I came back and had to transfer schools because Clarion University did not have a ROTC program. They do now, but I ended up going to Duquesne University, which is in the heart of Pittsburgh, and taking a bus to the University of Pittsburgh's ROTC. I mean, it's like now everybody has ROTC, but back then, like I had to take a bus from Duquesne to Pitt to attend their ROTC program and get credit for it and become an officer. But that was my very first experience, man. And we had just moved into this new house, and I was like finally getting a chance to like settle down after a long tumultuous period in my life. And like, we're settled now. We live on this farm in Western Pennsylvania, and it's amazing. But it was like digging through all these photos, and I found some pictures like that were taken on a disposable camera from that basic camp. And I'm like, what an idiot I was back then. Like, I felt like such a total noob,
Yeah.
Like, have you ever looked at pictures of yourself when you first went into the military before you had a trident? You're probably like, what a jackass I was, man. But that's
well, the Navy in particular, they make it really hard to look cool in some of those uniforms. I mean, it's difficult. You just got to get through it, get to buds. But eventually when do you end up at 10th Mountain?
So, okay, so I go through 2 years of ROTC. Here's a funny, I don't get, people haven't asked me about this, so I'll tell you for the first time, but so there's the whole like process of ROTC and like what branch you get in the Army. So the Army, as you know, but just in case viewers, listeners don't, it's like, it mirrors the civilian world. Like any job that you can have in the civilian world, you can have in the Army, whether it's truck driver, pharmacist, doctor, you know, outside of like the war fighting and the infantry, special forces, you know, Delta guys, that's a little bit different, but any other job, civilian job, you can do in the Army. So they divide the Army back then into 16 branches. Well, as I told you, after 9/11, I'm like, I just want to be infantry. I don't care, come hell or high water, I just want to be infantry. Well, it turns out that there were a lot of people after 9/11 that felt that way. And in order to get in the infantry at that time, you had to be at the top of your class in college, like in terms of GPA, like, and then you had to be at the top of your class in your ROTC class. And then you had to graduate in the top third of what you call your advanced camp class. And like your advanced camp was like the summer of your junior to senior year, where it's like basically 4 or 5 weeks, and this is a Fort Lewis, Washington, but a 4 or 5 week test of all of the skills that you've learned up until that point. Like it's a leadership thing, kind of stupid, but it was what it was. Well, I checked all those blocks, right? And I'm like, hell yeah, I even win this like George C. Marshall Award winner, which is for the top cadet, only a couple cadets, a few, like 50 cadets in the country get it. Like looking back, like who cares? Like it doesn't even buy you a cup of coffee today. But I was excited about it then because I thought it would guarantee me the branch in the infantry. Come to find out, like, and you do a list, right? Like I want infantry first, I wanted armor second, I wanted artillery third, and air defense all the combat arms branches is what I put there. And the Army, this is the freaking Army for you, right? Like they changed their entire process by which they select cadets for branches the year I was graduating. And they told me about this like right after I had checked all the blocks. My commander was like, you do all these things, 100% you're going to get your first choice. And so I did. And then everything changed. So like they made this promise to me and then they changed it. So my commander's like, well, look, Sean, like here's the Army's reasoning is that we got all these top tier officers going into the infantry. So the infantry's getting all these high speed people and all these other branches are being left with officers that maybe aren't as great. And the Army just wants to spread the wealth. And I just thought, well, this is BS. This is not what I was promised. So first lesson about how the military is, you know?
Yeah.
So I get my fourth choice, air defense artillery. And I'm like, and by the way, back then, like they were phasing out short range air defense artillery. So I was a short range air defense artillery officer, like specializing in Stinger missiles and stuff like that. And the Army wasn't even like, they weren't even directly attached to infantry platoons anymore. So they were like, I was in a dead branch, you know, like nobody, I was like, holy crap, like how is this possible? And so I get to air defense artillery officer basic course and I'm like hating life. And I'm like, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to do everything I can to, bust my ass. And again, going back to what my mom said, like do the right thing for the right reasons. I don't care. Like, nice. Sometimes life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? So that was sort of and so I ended up going through and I ended up graduating, was one of the honor grads at my air defense artillery course. And this was like a 20-week officer basic course. And it was just so boring and academic and stupid and not anything, no offense to any air defense artillery officers watching. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And every week, Jack, I would walk into my battery commander's office and I would do what's called like a 4187, a DA 4187. It's a form of a branch transfer, right? And I every week on the week, I go into my commander's office and I say, here's my 4187. I want to branch transfer infantry, even though I'm at air defense artillery. And Jack, like, it's not a thing. Like the Army does not, once you're branched, they don't let you branch transfer, because if one person does it, then everybody has to do it. So every week for 20 weeks, I strolled my ass into my commander's office, put that branch transfer paperwork, send it up to the Army, rejected every single week for 20 weeks. I graduate air defense artillery officer basic course. I go to airborne school with a bunch of BUDS candidates at airborne school that I were with. They were all like professional athlete condition, which is a side note, and like get my airborne wings as an air defense artillery officer. And then I go home for Christmas leave, and like I'm crying in my beer. I failed all these branch transfer packets for nothing. So like I'm drinking, I'm eating Christmas cookies, I'm getting out of shape. I'm getting ready to go to my next duty assignment, which is Fort Campbell as an air defense artillery officer. And no joke, the day before I was supposed to PCS to Fort Campbell, I get a call, and I'll never forget this, from a guy named Jack Fish, who was back then the air defense artillery branch manager. And he goes, well, Sean, congratulations, 30 plus branch transfer packets and more. Your branch transfer to infantry has been approved. You're going to Ranger school in a month. So I ended up, so that was how I became infantry. No infantry training whatsoever, none. And I ended up going, I've never talked about this, but I ended up going to Ranger school in February, freezing my ass off. No infantry training. I mean, outside of the stuff that you just learn along the way. And I failed the first time through, and the 4th Ranger Training Brigade commander's like trying to kick me out. I'm like, I ain't going anywhere, sir. I'm not leaving. I don't care. Come hell or high water, I'm staying here. Nothing you can do to kick me out of this school. So he begrudgingly like kicks me over to this rundown barracks with a couple of other Ranger candidates that are there. And like, we just sat there, waited for the next class, and they did everything they could to make our life hell, like had us raking leaves in the woods and rappelling up towers and painting the Ranger tower stuff, and waited for the next class to start. And then I made it straight through. And then I went to the 10th Mountain Division up at Fort Drum, and no infantry training whatsoever. And I get this infantry platoon that was named the Outlaw Platoon. And that's how it all started. That's a crazy, isn't that crazy?
No way. So before you get to Afghanistan, then when you show up there, are they like, what is this guy doing that has no training?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like.
And are you like what do you guys call it? Not a platoon commander, but what do you call it? A platoon leader.
Yeah.
So does that mean there's an 03 above you because now you're an 01
yes.
or 02, or what are you?
Yeah. So I get to my unit, and Colonel Toner, who is my battalion commander. A battalion in the Army is like 800 troops. Under a battalion, you have 4 companies, which have 120 troops apiece, approximately, and a headquarters and headquarters company. And my battalion commander, Chris Toner, looks at me. He's like, I don't see like anything about the infantry officer basic course here on your record. Like, and he looks at my shoulder. He's like, well, you got your Ranger tab. That's good enough for me. You're going down to Bravo Company, and you're taking over 3rd Platoon. And I was like, that's amazing, because the dream job of any young infantry officer, the entry-level position, is being a young platoon leader. And a lot of guys, Jack, will go into their first unit, and those are such sought-after positions that they'll spend time on staff just to wait for one to open up. And I like walked in, timing was great. We were set at that point, and this was in May of 2005. So we ended up in Afghanistan in January of 2006. And so we were going to the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana. It's basically like, I don't know if the SEALs do this kind of thing.
Yeah, we used to go there. What an amazing training facility.
Yeah, so that's where we were going for like a month of just deployment training and stuff. And I get there.
Gordon Range is there. That place was legit.
Yes. So that big shoot house at Shugart Gordon and stuff, we did that. We rolled through that and stuff. Really, really great training. But we were going there in 2 days, and I show up to my unit, and when my platoon 3rd Platoon didn't have a platoon leader, and I got it. And I was like, this is awesome. And I get down there, my company commander, who is an 03 captain, looks at my record and is like, WTF, man, like, you haven't even been to infantry officer basic course. So he's like, got me. It's like, seriously, nobody believed that I mean, this guy has no freaking training. Like, nobody trusted me. And I got this infantry platoon. So my company commander had me shadowing our executive officer, who's a lieutenant named Dave Brown. Awesome. We ended up becoming like really close friends, but he was like a major asshole back then. And like, I get it. He's an XO, but he was like real tough on me. But I ended up being much better for it in the end. Yeah. He's just a fantastic officer, like very close with him to even today. But we end up getting there, and like, man, my platoon was like the bad news bears of my battalion. Like, we couldn't get anything right in training, but we never quit. And we ended up just honing our skills with it. But because we never quit, and because we had a competitive attitude, we ended up being just like very lethal and reliable in combat. But at first we were nothing. I mean, we were not high speed. Let's just say that we messed up a lot. But man, that's crazy. I haven't talked about that. I haven't talked about that, I don't think, ever on any other show, but
Okay.
that's how it went down.
Oh man, that's so wild. I wonder what the guys were thinking like day one. It's like, because it sounds like a movie, you know, it sounds like a movie. You have the guy walk in with no experience, and the dudes are
Oh,
like, on
listen to this. So like I get there, and because I've had no infantry training, like I don't know how to put together any of the gear. Like no freaking clue, man. Like, cause like we didn't use any of like, you know, at ADA, Air Defense Artillery, ADA's officer basic course, like we didn't have any of like the cool PEC-2 lasers or sights. We were carrying just like M16 rifles and train. Yeah, we didn't have any. So I get to this infantry unit that's going to combat. They have like all this high speed Jetsons level technology and equipment. I've never seen any of this shit before. I'm like, what's this? What's this laser? What's this sight? Which one do I want? And of course, I'm at the 10th Mountain Division, right? Where there are like 2 seasons, July and winter. So not only am I getting like regular Army kit, I'm getting like their extreme cold weather kit as well, which is like a million pieces of equipment that you got to know how to use and the layers and everything else. Eventually, after a few months, like my non-commissioned officers trained me on all of it. But when I got there, man, like I going through CIF, and like one of my weapon squad leaders, Jason Sabaki, who in Outlaw platoon is like the Satanist in my platoon. Like he's my senior weapon squad leader. Is just like already been to combat before, like seen heavy combat, like no gruff, no nonsense, like what the F you want, sir, that kind of a guy. And he's like walking me through the CIF where I'm getting issued all this gear, and we're leaving. I don't even have a place to rent. I don't have a place to live. Nothing. I'm living at like in like some like Fort Drum Inn or something for $30 a night off post, where like, you know, not very desirable things happen there, but that's where I was. And it's like they put all my stuff in like this shopping cart, Jack, and like I'm standing in my office with all of my soldiers looking at me thinking, what a jackass this guy is. They dump this shopping cart out, and there is a pile of gear that's as tall as me in the office, and I have no idea how to put it together, and we're leaving in 2 days. And I kind of look around, and how the hell do you tell your soldiers that without totally losing their confidence? And I was just like, look, guys, I have no idea how to do any of this stuff, and I'm not an infantry guy. I was never trained on any of this stuff. So, and I just pulled my non-commissioned officers, and I was just honest with them. And I said, look, there are going to be times where I'm sure you're going to want to wring my neck. All that I ask, that if that actually happens, all that I ask is that you don't do it in front of the men. If you have to do it, just pull me behind closed doors and square me away. And I said, this equipment right here, like there ain't no way in hell I'm going to be able to get this done before we get to JRTC, and I don't know how to do it anyway. So they end up like helping me put together all of my equipment. I mean, it was just like a disaster. It was just like a disaster for me. Like everything for me as a young leader, like the infantry has, I'm sure you've seen Iron Mike, the follow me guy outside of Fort Benning, like, and all the movies that are like, you know, you see the infantry leaders charging into the fight. Like I've done that, but I did not. Everything that could have gone wrong for me as a young leader in the military went wrong. Like there should have been no reason why my guys had any faith in me whatsoever. And people read Outlaw Platoon and they think like they see the end state, but getting to that point was like, man, it was one hell of a ride, man. It was one hell of a ride, and a bumpy one at that.
Yeah. Well, in Outlaw Platoon, one of the big takeaways is the baptism by fire. For me reading that through, like, and obviously, like I said earlier, that's your experience, but that is not unique to you in Afghanistan, Iraq, or the history of warfare in general. Meaning, you get, no matter how much you train up stateside, getting there and being in the thick of it, that's baptism by fire, I think, pretty much.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, Jack, it was crazy, man. Like we did not have a whole lot of intelligence from our area of operations prior to going there. Like,
did you just know you were going to Afghanistan, or did you know a province, or did you know
that was it? Like, we knew we were going to Eastern Afghanistan, and that was really it. And I don't know, like, we ended up going to Paktika province. We found that out a few months in advance. And we found out like my platoon was especially going to be like right on the border, probably 5 kilometers or clicks from the Pakistan border. And like it was a fairly new base, but we were probably about 25 minutes north of Fire Base Shkin, which was a special operations base right there. Like if you look on a map, like Angkor Ada, like the border checkpoint between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where they have like international summit meetings is co-located there. And that's where our base was, like right on the border. But we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into until we talked to the 173rd Airborne Division, who was already there and had spent the better part of a year getting shot up, like the likes of which they themselves, as the 173rd, never anticipated that they would. I mean, it was to say that we were thrown into the meat grinder was almost an understatement, because when we landed there, this was 2006. So in the wake of 2001, Special Forces, I'm sure SEAL teams, 10th Mountain Division, Operation Anaconda went in there and just routed the Taliban in a matter of a few months. And all of your viewers probably know all about the stuff with Delta and the Tora Bora and bin Laden getting away. Well, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and some of the more sinister elements of this global jihadist all-star team that was there went to Pakistan and licked their wounds for years, consolidated, reorganized, and came back with a vengeance into Afghanistan, especially along the border in 2005. And the 173rd Airborne on that deployment, Jack, felt that. I mean, they just got hammered. And the one of the lieutenants, he was a young captain when we got there. Maybe he was a first lieutenant, I don't know. But his name is Ryan Kennedy. And this dude, I just have so much respect for him. He was just an incredible leader that understood the culture. He knew the actual local Afghan elders and leaderships and the power structure and all that stuff. Had great relationships with him. He gave me, and this is like when we're really getting the intelligence, is when we finally get there. But he just gave us a great like left seat, right seat ride, basically a tour of Afghanistan, telling us what's what. But from the moment we got to Forward Operating Base Bromell, which is now, I mean, it's not there anymore, but it became FOB Boris. But Forward Operating Base Bromell was what it was initially called. When we got there, it was unrelenting fire, like every single day. What was supposed to be 12 months became 16 months. And every single day, Jack, like every single day we were under attack. Every single day. I mean, and the enemy that we faced there, these were not, I don't know. You just think, like, again, you don't know what you don't know, especially as someone who's never been in a situation like that before. You sort of think that we're going to be the ones with all the equipment, the technological advantage, and the tactical acumen, all that stuff we're bringing to bear as Americans. That's just sort of how you think, right? That's who we are. We're Americans. We're meat eaters and we're ass kickers, right? That wasn't the case, man. That wasn't the enemy that we were fighting. And looking back with the benefit of hindsight, well, it like makes a lot of sense, because the Afghans fought the Russians in the 80s, and then they fought in the Afghan Civil War in the 90s, and then against us in a post 9/11 war. I mean, your average Afghan foreign fighter or Taliban, Mujahideen, whatever you want to call them, has 10 years combat experience on any American private, maybe even non-commissioned officer. And these people, they were just better than us at first. They were just better. And they knew the land. They, even in the valley where we were, I mean, we were in the Bromell Valley on the border. Well, it's like we were at 14,000 feet in the valley. They had already become, like, what's the right word? Acclimatized, right? Like, I can't remember. Yeah. It's escaping me, but took us a few months just to be able to like breathe while you're climbing and all that kit. So they just had us, man. And this baptism by fire is accurate, because from the time that we landed, I mean, our bird got shot at, our CH-47 helicopter got shot at the moment that we landed, and it was just relentless for 16 months, man. 16 months.
Well, for people who haven't read Outlaw Platoon, can you describe your first day in Afghanistan? There's so many powerful stories in here, but that one is pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. it was eye-opening for me as well as a young leader, because I went into combat. I told you at the beginning of this, like, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 22-year-old kid wanting to make a difference in the world, wanting to take the fight to the enemy.
Mm.
And but what combat does to you as a person, and I think in many ways, this is why families don't recognize their loved ones when they come home. And this isn't like a negative thing. It's too often portrayed in the media and in Hollywood as like a negative metamorphosis, right? But it's not. Like there are positive elements to it too, but my point is that combat changes you in a lot of ways. And for me, that metamorphosis from civilian to combat veteran or warrior happened on my first day. And we get there, our bird lands. As I mentioned, like, we're like on the helicopter landing zone, and the CH-47 blades, like the big Metropolitan Transit bus looking helicopter with 2 rotors on it. That's sort of like what we were on. We storm off the back, ramp falls, storm out the back, brown out of dust. It's chaos. People are like throwing equipment. The bird's trying to get off the HLZ fast. And like, you could hear over the chaos of those rotors, this thud, like directly to our east from the mountains that separated Afghanistan from Pakistan. And they were at those mountains. Like, when you get to Afghanistan, they're breathtaking. Like, it's hard to describe in words how, like, right there they are, because you live out west, so you see mountains all the time. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. They towered over our base, and you could hear this explosion just tear over the bird. Like, you could hear it just zoom right over the bird, and you could hear it land just west of our base with like this dull thud. And everybody like on the HLZ looks, and we just see this like very thin pall of smoke. You hear this, like, you hear the impact, and then you feel it, whoomp, right? And you see this like just black pall of smoke rising, and then just all hell breaks loose and starts scrambling for the base. And I didn't know what the hell was going on. It was the first time I've ever been shot at in my life. So I get there, and you're a lieutenant. You're supposed to know what to do in those moments. Like in garrison, you have non-commissioned officers who run the show, and it's a lieutenant's job to like do the paperwork. In combat, like, you got to know, because your people are looking to you to be decisive and make a decision. And the reality was, and I just did not know, because it's and all of my non-commissioned officers who had already been to war before, man, that they knew exactly what was going on. And so like, I felt very inadequate in those first moments after we got attacked. And like, I had, non-commissioned officers run into our aid station to prep for casualties. I had non-commissioned officers run into our tactical operations center to report to higher that we were under attack. And so, these were guys that had already like been there before, and I was like standing there desperate for a way to help, just like in my full kit, duffel bags in hand, like don't even have a room yet, And Ryan Kennedy comes up to me, and he's the 173rd Airborne guy. And there's this private running up to me. He goes, "Sir, we need every available body at the front gate, and we need you here like yesterday." And I'm like, "Can you help?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." And like, I just haul ass behind these 173rd Airborne guys. Now, these guys, like, it's like funny the things that you remember, but these guys had the old school desert camo uniforms, and
Oh,
we
wow.
had the new ACUs, right? So like, we had 2 separate uniforms. The gray Army ACU.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought you were talking about chocolate chips for a second, but yeah, I realize now.
No, like they had the DCUs like that you would see on like Jarhead the movie or anything that we would wear in Desert Storm. We had these like garbage ACU uniforms that were gray and digital. They sucked.
Yeah.
And so like, we're hauling ass after this column of American soldiers running to the front gate, and we get to the front gate, and it's like any gated community you'd see here in America. And our base, there was our base, the American side of the base, a gate, and then the Afghan compound where the Afghan National Army was. We were co-located with them. We do joint patrols with them from time to time. And so we're at that gate, and I get there, and I just see just this, what could have been an image just straight from hell. And it's just like these probably 20 or 30 Afghans carrying the broken and bloodied bodies of small kids. And one of the American soldiers that were there, I'm like, "What the hell is going on?" This kid goes to me, I don't know his name, must have been like 18, 19 years old. It's like, "Those rockets that the enemy's shooting at us," because they didn't stop. It wasn't just one. They're still coming in. He's like, well, they're missing us, but they landed in the school, the Afghan school that's just west of our base, and hit a playground, and all these kids were out playing. And I mean, Americans, like, there's like this debate going on between our interpreter and these Afghan families, and Kennedy, who's there, is like, what the hell's going on? Let's get this gate open. Let's help these kids. And then there was like discussion of like, wait, we can't because suicide bombers, like the ethical quandary that suicide attacks put you in, like in those moments, like maybe there could have been, looking back on it, there could have been a suicide bomber among them. We open up the gate amongst all these wounded kids, a bomb goes. So there's like that debate. So, everything is turned on its head in combat, and we throw this gate open, and there's like this fight over the kids, and our interpreter looks, hey, they won't let us take any of the girls. We have to promise to take the boys first. And it's like holy, like, this is crazy. Like, that's not how we operate in America. You see kids that are hurt, wounded, killed, like, you are risking everything to save them. It doesn't matter. Like, that's how we're wired, right? And so we throw the gate open, we blow them off, and we just start grabbing kids. And it was just chaos, right? And kids screaming, and I grabbed this kid, and I just, like, it turned out it was a little girl, and I'm holding her in my arms, and I look down, and I'm just like holding her, and I'm like, hey, it's going to be okay. And she's like totally beside herself, petrified, tears streaming down her face. She has this like dark, auburn hair, like these bright jade green eyes. And like, I'm like, it's going to be okay. She can't understand me. There's a language barrier there. You know what I mean? It's just like total chaos. And like, if I could describe that moment, it's like looking into like a kaleidoscope and turning it, and you're like right in the middle. Like, everything else is happening around you almost like that, Because I like think back on that moment all the time, and it's like, it's like not a clean memory, if that makes sense. Like, it was just like sensory overload in every possible way. And so I get this girl, and I'm like turning around, and I'm like running with her back to the aid station. And after a few steps, Jack, like, I'm telling you, it's just like, it felt like there was lead in my lungs and in every muscle of my body. There was just not enough oxygen in the air for me to run that, what could have been 100, 150 yards from the gate to our aid station. I mean, it became manifestly apparent to me in that moment that, like, even though I was in good shape, I wasn't in Afghanistan fighting shape. And all the while, these rockets are still coming in, man. Like, they're just like, and they're walking them on target. So they had like unsophisticated launchers where they would see where one would land, and it was like Kentucky windage to them. They'd adjust their launcher and fire again, and so they were just kind of getting closer. Now at this point, like, we're like halfway to the aid station, and they're starting to like land in our base, and one lands close to me, close enough to me to almost knock me off my feet. I mean, I staggered, I took a knee, and I'm like trying to hold this like little girl, and Jack, it like sucked the air right out. The explosion like sucked the air right out of my lungs. And I remember just like, I couldn't breathe. Like, there was nothing in my lungs to breathe. And I just remember like inhaling this like black acrid smoke. It stung my eyes. Like, I could barely see. And I stand up and I turn and try to like run through this smoke. And like, I'm thinking, I just feel this like warmth spread out on my right leg. And I'm like, oh my God, like, it's like the first day in Afghanistan, and I'm already hit. And then I start getting worried, like, where am I hit? It's on my right hip. And I look down, trying to furiously pat down to find the source of this injury, because like, I'm starting to panic. And I put my right hand on like this bony fragment of this little girl's leg, right where her leg should have been, but it wasn't. And in the chaos of the moment at the front gate of trying to scoop up this little girl, I didn't even realize that she had lost her leg basically below the knee. It was, and I just like, I almost lost it right then and there. I at that point in my life, man, like, I had experienced death of family members that I loved, but I had never been that close to it. And like, I remember like getting her into the aid station, laying her, you get into those aid stations, and like, we had our docs and medics all in there and NCOs, and they're like all like working. Now all I remember is like these bright white lights and like these like aluminum shiny metal tables, and there was like 5 or 6 of them, and I just found an empty one, laid this little girl down, and by the time I don't know, man, like I was like out of it. I was almost in like shock. I remember laying this little girl down and looking as I laid her down. Everyone's like kind of looking at me like I'm crazy. And I realized that the girl had already died. She died in the time I could pick her up from her father and bring her to the table. Like I just didn't even realize any of it. I mean, it was just so crazy. And all I remember, because at this point I was like, when I say I was in shock, like I kind of mean like I was still conscious and stuff. And at that point, like all of our training sort of takes over, where you're just like on autopilot, I guess, a little bit. And I remember scooping this little girl up and walking her back to her dad, giving her to her dad, and her dad like nods his head and like, thank you for trying, and just turns and walks away. And as I'm walking back to the aid station, at this time, like the rocket attack had ended, we were like firing counter battery fire. And Kennedy was like, hey man, this is Afghanistan. Like, welcome to Afghanistan. And that was it. And from that moment on, I remember Jack, like taking that uniform that was just totally destroyed and throwing it on like this burn pit that we had that was like out close to the HLZ out to the east, like later in the evening. And I'm telling you, man, that moment was the beginning of a metamorphosis in me from like, there's something inside you. And I don't know what it is when you start experiencing things like that. It just something inside you. It may be too harsh to say it turns off, but something inside you, like the azimuth changes, right? Like you're something deeply inside your soul just changes. And that was the start of it for me. And that moment was really like a microcosm of my entire time there. Because, and really, Jack, that was the hardest part about the deployment. Like we killed a lot of bad guys over there, man. Like we really did. And I don't lose a wink of sleep over it. We killed probably my platoon. We were outnumbered everywhere we went, so it was easy to find the bad guys. But I mean, this was back at a time where we had one brigade in all of Regional Command East. I mean, at the height of the Afghan War, we had like 120,000 troops there. Back then, one brigade, a brigade is a little bit bigger than a battalion. So 8,000 troops in all of Regional Command East. That's it. That's all we had. So we were outnumbered everywhere. And I mean, we killed probably 300 enemy soldiers. We're super proud of our service over there. We dealt a lot more pain than we took, Jack. And I'm not bragging about that, but the tough part about it was seeing the kids trapped in the middle of this. And I think about this every single day. Not that I'm like a victim of this experience. I volunteered for it. I would do it again in a second. I love this country. But like, what always like was remarkable to me about the children of Afghanistan, first of all, like they're just great kids. They're just like American kids in a lot of ways. And that like but some of the major differences, I don't have to tell you this, you know, of course, but what I always like remarked at, and I think about often is that like on one of my very first patrols after I put this first day to bed, and like I remember driving around, like patrolling through the mountains. We came upon this like mountain village, and I see this like group of like little kids, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just they're all like out in their front yard, which is not like a front yard that you and I would understand it. You know, it's just like rocky mountain face, right? And these like culottes built into that mountain face. And these kids are like running around in bare feet and like burlap sacks, essentially covered in dirt. I'm thinking like you and I couldn't walk around on our bare feet, like in that terrain. And these kids are just kicking around a half deflated soccer ball. And they were just loving life, man. They were just like laughing hysterically. Like, and I just think like these kids could easily be in America. Like they don't recognize that there's a war on. They don't recognize that they're even trapped in the middle. They don't recognize any of that. These are just kids. And that's what keeps me up at night. You know, that it's just like those little kids that were trapped in the middle all that time and all that hard work, you know, not to make it political, right? But like now what? What do we have to show for it now in Afghanistan, Jack? Not to like flash forward to now, but I'd be lying if I told you that I look back on that time there and I think I'm very proud of my service there, as I said, and I'm very proud of the performance of my men. And you know, forgive the parlance because it's like this was back at a time where there were only men in the infantry. So this is how you say it, right? But like, you know, we just to surrender over there. And like everybody over there that helps us is like just thrown to the wolves. It's just like the whole thing was just a disaster. But yeah, man, that deployment was one hell of a ride. That's for sure.
And that's just day one.
That's just day one. That's just day one.
When you look, and how long did you spend there again? Because you thought you were going home at one point at the year
Yeah.
12, 14-month mark or something, and they're like,
Yes.
guys, get a couple more months.
Yeah. So you want to hear this? So we're supposed to be there for 12 months. And I mean, we were in, so like 85% of my platoon was wounded, some twice, some 3 times. I was wounded.
And you probably should have gone home, right?
Yeah, I probably, and I get a lot of flack for that even to this day. I ended up fracturing my skull because I got blown up 3 times in this fight. It was on June 10th, 2006, and it ended up being like a 12 or 13-hour firefight. And the first time I got blown up was by an airburst mortar. And then a couple hours later, I got blown up by a rocket propelled grenade. And then the last time, rocket propelled grenade. And then throughout all that, I ended up like fracturing my skull and having a cerebral spinal fluid leak and everything else. It was like kind of messy. But this was back at a time, Jack. And again, you know how it is, like where like traumatic brain injury, that acronym wasn't even a thing back in 2006. It wasn't. Like it was like even the NFL had just started, like had not even begun exploring like head injuries. And so much about like the research that we've done on head injuries in the military is really taken from some of the work that done on the, you know how that is. But so back then it was like, oh, you got a concussion, man. Like, oh, take some ibuprofen. Don't go to sleep. You remember, like, don't go to sleep right away.
All right.
And we didn't even have like I remember my commander was like, you got to go get a CT scan or an MRI.
Is this after you let him know, or he saw that there was like brain fluid leaking?
Yeah. Everybody knew, and it all smelled. And my soldiers used to be like, it smells like bananas. It smells like bananas. So like it was kind of like the running joke. But they tried to send me back to get a CT scan to Bagram, which is like, in Afghanistan, it's a whole thing. There's no paved roads. There's like no economy. There's like really like the only thing that people did where we were, and it was like so hardcore tribal that like the only thing that people did was like they would gather wood in the summer so they could keep themselves warm in the winter. And then it was like rinse, repeat, like maybe sell some stuff at the bazaar. That was it. Work on an American base. So like you couldn't, getting to Bagram wasn't like a small feat, and there was not a lieutenant to replace me. And as if to add fuel to the fire, the CAT scan machine, there was no CAT scan machine in country at that point, and the MRI machine was broken. So like they would have had to ship me back to Germany to even do a test. And I was like, nah, I ain't doing that. I'm not leaving my soldiers. And and my reasoning was for it, like I had 6 soldiers in my platoon, and that 16-month period shot in the head. All of them survived by the grace of God somehow, but they stayed. They never left. And if they can do it, so can I. They didn't want to let the men in my platoon down. And by God, I felt like I owed them the same level of dedication that they gave the mission as well. And so I stayed and ended up, it was like 6 weeks of hell, like migraine headaches, and the leaks ended up stopping, but ended up kind of getting better, but fighting through to the end. But yeah, supposed to be 12 months, ended up being 16. So man, there are some crazy stories about that too. Like we ended up building like the very first combat outpost in Afghanistan. Like, the whole cop this, cop that. Like, because there was a major strategy shift happening at the tail end of our deployment. And we were going from counter-terror operations to counterinsurgency, which that's a whole thing. We could probably do a whole show on that. I don't think it benefited Afghanistan at all. In fact, I think it helped us lose the initiative there. But nevertheless, we built the very first one, Combat Outpost Margah, in one of the worst, most dangerous spots in all of Afghanistan. And we get this task, right? Oh, you gotta build the first combat outpost. You should be proud, blah, blah, blah. And of course we've been there for a year, and we're like, nobody wants to get whacked like a month out from going home. And like now we're tasked with building this base. Like we're in the infantry, right? So this isn't like our thing. But so we're not going to actually build it. We're just going to secure the combat engineers while they do it. And they're like, okay. So the place that's selected for this is like in the low ground, and I'm not exaggerating. There is like a 3,000-foot straight up hill, a stone's throw away. And I'm like, big army, and all these strategists think it's wise to put the base here, like not up there, but here, like you don't have to be like General Patton to know that this is like a tactical disaster in the making. And so we start building this base. This is another thing I haven't talked about in years. It's funny, like when you start talking about this stuff, like it comes back to you. So we start like building this base and securing the engineers, and the engineers get there. And like, keep in mind, like we've been living there a year and we've been kicking the enemy's asses. Yeah, they were better than us at first, but it got to a point where we killed so many of them, and then they had new recruits come in, and the dynamic for the new recruits of the enemy was like us first getting there, but we ended up killing so many of them that we ended up knowing the terrain, and our tactics were better than them. Like, so we like, it was kind of like that in and of itself was an interesting, crazy evolution. But these combat engineers show up, Jack, and like they're like totally spooked, because this area is like a real bad area. And if you ever find yourself in a real bad area, there's something you can just feel the hairs in the back of your neck stand up. You just feel something ain't right. Like disaster's just around the corner. Well, that's what they were feeling. We got used to that feeling. And like, so they like start filling in these HESCOs, the HESCOs, like the huge sandbag for like, they're the walls of the bases, and they bring in these like front end loaders to fill them up. And like, so that night, like we like turn in for the night. The engineers are sleeping in the middle of our perimeter, and like we're pulling security and guard. And they built up these big hills. We parked our gun trucks up there. I mean, it was as secure as it was going to get. And somehow, some way, like their platoon leader, the engineer platoon leader is like, comes over to me, and he's like, "We got to get out of here." I'm like, "What the freaking hell you mean we got to get out of here? Like we got to build this base, man." He's like, no. My boss up in Oregon, he wants us out of here. Like, we're getting out of here. And no freaking joke, man. In the middle of the night at like 3 a.m., this dude with all these engineers leaves all this heavy equipment there and just drives the F off and leaves us there in this base, dude, this base in the worst area of Afghanistan, like worst possible area, with half-filled HESCO walls. So like the bottoms were like filled like 3/4 of the way with dirt, and then the tops were just basically paper with wire around them. So we're like stranded out there a month before we were coming home. And so we stay out. I call my boss. I'm like, "Hey, sir, like you're never gonna believe this." Like, and of course on the radio, I'm like, "Hey, Black Hawk 3-6, this is or this Black Hawk 3-6," and doing that whole shtick. And I'm like, "You're never gonna believe this." Like, the engineers just like totally left. Like, "What? They left?" I'm like, "Yeah, they did him out. They're gone. They're out of here." And he's like, "What?" So like we were trying to like get a handle on this situation. And so we tuck in for the next night, because we're like out there in the open, like left flapping. The base is not complete. There are no gates, no dirt, nothing. And no joke, that next night, we get a call that there were at like 3 a.m, that there were 300 enemy fighters converging on our position, 250 directly from the east from Pakistan, and another 50 from the northwest coming down in a giant pincer movement with us in the middle. And they mark these things on like what they call like, I think it's called like an FBCB2, like that little computer. It's like FBC, Forward Battle Command and Control Center, FBCB2. I don't know what the hell it's called. I forget what these acronyms are called. There's this little computer in my truck, right? And they like put all these enemy fighters on there. And then they give the Predator feed directly to me, because we got a Predator in the sky. Dude, they show these guys, and I like, the video is still out there, but this tactical column of enemy soldiers, the Predators, like following this all the way, like just in a tactical column all the way back to Pakistan. 250, 300 people on our way to overrun my platoon. I had 24 people on the ground, like half-filled HESCO walls all around me. This is a couple days before we were supposed to go home. Somehow we had caught these guys on ISR. We just had our battalion commander, Colonel Toner, and his whole staff, man, they were just, boy, were they pains in the asses in training, but boy, did it pay off in combat. Like, we didn't cut corners in training, and it paid off. We just had a great staff. Like, and the culture of our battalion was like, "Hey, the staff exists to support the field guys, the guys that are out doing the door kicking." And that was, everyone took it real seriously. Well, RS2 had just had a ISR in the area, a predator in the area, or a shadow or something like that caught these guys. And man, we stacked up so much air. We stacked up like, we had the Predator with the Hellfires. We had Apache helicopters ended up on station. We ended up with an A-10 Warthog after that, and then with a B-1 Strategic Lancer. And like, what's the last thing that these guys said, the enemy, because we listened to their radio, it was like, hey, just when you get on the objective, overrun the American platoon, cut off their heads. Like, that's the last thing they said. And like, we're listening and we're like, oh shit. And then there were like 3 JDAMs dropped on their heads, and we killed every single one of them. Like, every single enemy fighter. We dropped, and there is a Predator video of this out there somewhere. Like, it's out there. We dropped 3 2,000-pound bombs on them, then fired like 300 rounds of 105 millimeter artillery. And then we ceased that and brought in Apaches to pick off the stragglers. And on the Predator video, you could see, like, because it's white hot, black hot infrared stuff, and you could see the enemies like running away, and like the helicopter killed every single one of them. And we get on the objective the next day doing like what they call an SSE, like a sensitive site exploitation. I think that's what it is, SSE. We get there. I've never seen anything like it. Up to that point in my deployment, we killed lots of bad guys over there, but we get on the objective, Jack, and it looked like every dystopian apocalypse scene that you could possibly, from any movie that you've ever seen. Like, there were human body parts and entrails up in trees. Like we would get, it was like out of some horror movie, just walking down this wadi system and just human body parts everywhere. We had just completely devastated the enemy, killed every single one. And we come to find out, and this was never, like, nobody's really ever talked about this, but they all had Pakistani Frontier Corps ID cards on them. And Secretary of Defense ends up coming into town, like into Eastern Afghanistan a couple days later. This intel is passed to him, never sees the light of day back in America. We end up being extended for 4 months, and we got extended, just like pulled out of, like, we get back from this mission, like crashed that night. And my company commander's like, and this is, by the way, my soldiers at this point, Jack, after a couple days after this mission, start redeploying home. And, you like redeploy home in phases. And, you're like sending guys, like, there are guys that are already home at this point, like meeting up with their wives and stuff. Oh, you made it home, like hugs, kisses all around. There are guys at like Organy and Salerno, and then in Germany, like, at different phases. I was like still left on the base as a key leader, and we get called into the Tactical Operations Center. And Colonel Toner like reads this quote, because I thought we were just going to have to like go help another, like on quick reaction force, like go help another unit that's out there in the field or something like that. You never know. Like, when you're getting called out of your bunk at 3 a.m, it's rarely, if ever, good, and like, he reads this quote from General Charles Krulak, who's like a Marine Corps commandant. And it was like, men, in times, I can't remember the exact quote, Jack, but you could pull it up on Google or something, I'm sure. But it's like, in times of great strife, men will cling to leaders who are involved and not detached. And he's like, I'm going to need you to all be involved leaders right now. He's like, because our unit has just been extended for 4 months, or until mission complete. And so when I heard that, man, I like completely lost it, like threw up outside, because that would mean another spring offensive. My men were already home. Like, they'd have to be, in some cases, Jack, the MPs had to go to people's houses and drag soldiers away from their family, put them on birds, and fly them back to Afghanistan. I mean, it was a freaking disaster. And of course, like, the private mafia, right, who somehow like know everything, simultaneously everything about everything but nothing. Because it says in the orders, until mission complete, they're like, oh, we're never going home. They're just leaving us. And there was some truth to that, because the reason why we were stuck there, we didn't really ever know why, but we suspect it was because it happened at the exact same time as a surge in Iraq. And so every available Army unit went to Iraq, and there was no one left to replace us. So we were just left there And so what was a 12-month deployment became 16 months. So 485 days in a row. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Longest combat deployment in global war on terror history in Afghanistan right there. Absolutely nuts.
Amazing.
I mean, it's crazy, right? Like, that's why I say I look back on it, it's like surreal. Like, I can't believe I lived through that.
There was I forget what, I put it in my first book. There was an Army unit in Iraq that was going home in phases, 2004, when we were over there. And I remember, because we were just all kind of co-located together in Baghdad, but they had a similar experience. And once again, get the unit, but they were headed home, and these guys were already home, and then they got to work. So some guys like on the tarmac, in Baghdad, getting ready to go. And they're like, hey, you're staying for another 4 months or whatever it was. And they had to do the same thing, send guys back who were already home. And the heartbreaking part of it was that some of those guys that came back, then they didn't make it home ever again.
I know it, dude. Jack, like, that caught. So you think, like, if you really like look at, for the Army anyway, the psychological ramifications of that for my troops, it was the greatest leadership challenge that I've ever faced. And all the firefight, I mean, we were in hundreds of direct fire engagements, 100,000. Like, our base got hit with, I think, 4,000 or 5,000 indirect fire attacks, like rockets, mortars, I mean, like, we were there 485 days. You do the math. Like, every single day we had this like World War II air raid siren. It didn't matter where you were, whether you were eating chow or you're sleeping or whatever. And that thing would go off and you'd run to the bunker or take cover because our base was getting hit again every single day. Despite all that stuff, the hardest thing for me as a young leader was that, like, bringing my soldiers back into the fold after being extended. And if you think back to like the psychology of it all, like, to the Spartan warriors, they were in charge of their own training, maintaining their own weapons, sword, shield. And if they like weren't up to snuff, like, it's largely maybe because they didn't train hard enough or whatever. But our Army as it exists today, and it's probably very different in your community, in the SEAL community and stuff, but for infantry guys, the Army fulfills a role psychologically where they're almost like a parent. They provide you everything. They issue you your weapons, they issue you your training, they issue you your armor. And so it was almost like when the Army made that decision to say, no, you're not coming home after 12 months, you're going home after 16 months. It really affected my soldiers psychologically, because it was almost like a parent betraying their, you know what I mean? Like, you rely on big Army for everything, but of course, again, being a little older, a little wiser now, looking back on that, it's like they call you GI, government issue, for a reason. And that's because there's a mission, and that comes before everything. And sometimes that means like the worst, and being extended when you thought you were going home. I mean, think about the psychological impact of these guys that would, like, they were turning in their ammunition, they were getting rid of their armor piercing rounds or sappy plates and turning in their gear, letting their hair down psychologically. I made it home, only to be thrown back into it. I mean, that's a real that's a mess right there. And that's the kind of stuff that we had to deal with, myself included, when we came back. I mean, my guys came back on that base, man, and they were devastated. They were just utterly devastated, and we got no breathing room. Our company commander was like, suck it up. We're back on it the next day. Let's go. That was it. And we just did. And it sucked. It sucked.
what lessons do you draw from that time when you look back now, these years later, or maybe a year later after being in it, or all these years later? What lessons do you draw from that experience that you either use in your daily personal life or professional life that are really a part of you?
I think there are a lot of things that I learned, so first in Ranger School and then in practice in combat. And I'm sure you can understand this as somebody who's been through this SEAL training, everything else, how Hell Week and everything, how horrible all that stuff is. But in Ranger School, there's this like, what you call unofficially like the March of Unknown Distance. And it's when you go from Ranger assessment phase to the patrol phase in Georgia and Darby. And there, after you make it through Ranger assessment phase is sort of like Hell Week. I mean, it's different, but that's like when you go through all the rigorous, really, really terrible stuff and they try to weed out the people right up front.
They starve you too, don't they? Aren't
Yeah,
you
they
like,
starve you and you're like,
advanced?
you're starving and you're not sleeping. And that's like all of Ranger School. Like I went into Ranger School. Oh man, I went in great shape, 225 pounds when I got there, running like a 630 mile, graduated at 160 pounds.
Oh,
It was rough. But I failed, spent longer there than it's common. Everyone fails, but almost everybody. Very few people make it through Ranger School, what they call true blue, like straight through. True blue, straight through. God, I haven't said that in a long time, but at Ranger School, there's this thing, March of Unknown Distance is kind of what you call it. At least you don't think it's of unknown distance. And the rumor is the RIs, Ranger instructors start putting out, going to be a 12-mile march from the Ranger assessment phase to Darby, 12 miles, right? And then of course, the private mafia or the Ranger mafia, because in Ranger School, you have no rank, right? So you're just Ranger. So it's just your name tape in U.S. Army. There's no rank structure at all. You're all equal. And so, of course, we're all like, oh, 12 miles, that's all. And you get it in your mind, right? 12 miles. And I don't know this is a crazy thing. And so we start the march. And of course, it's like after the first week and you just got your ass kicked for a week. I mean, seriously, you're freaking smoked. They got to give you 3 hours of sleep a night. But the fine print is like, it doesn't have to be successive. So you're getting like a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there. And like, they're always waking you up. So it's just like really, it's rough, man. It's not like SEAL training, but it's rough.
yeah.
And so we're like 12 miles. We start this march, 12 miles comes and goes. And then you can start seeing the guys. And again, at this point, it was just guys in Ranger School. Then you can start seeing on people's faces, like, what the is going on, and 13 miles, 14 miles, and then people start falling out. And I don't know what it was. It was just like maybe the expectation that they had in their head that it was going to be 12, but it wasn't, and all the while, I mean, the march ended up being like 19 and a half miles from Ranger assessment. And this is with like 90 pounds of kit and stuff. I mean, it was absolutely horrible. And like what I learned later is that it's specifically designed to be a mental game. Like sometimes you just have to frame your mind that shit is going to suck so bad. Don't ever look to the end. Sometimes the lesson is no matter how bad things get, no matter what life throws at you, like just put one foot in front of the other and just keep marching, just keep going until we mission complete. And so it ended up being 19 miles. I remember I had this blister on the bottom of my foot in Darby that was like literally the size of the bottom of my foot. Like, and I remember like popping it from the side and putting my foot down, and it was just unbelievable stuff that you experience in Ranger School. But ended up being 19 miles. And then that specifically in Afghanistan, that lesson, Jack, was so important for me when we got extended. Because like, okay, hey, if it's 4 months, whatever, I can take it. I don't care. One foot in front of the other, right? Until mission complete. And that lesson for me has been something that has been with me since. And there's been many lessons, leadership lessons, but just the idea of there are going to be times in your life, whether you're working at a company, writing books, whether you have writer's block or you got a problem on the business side of things, or, problem with the publisher, like things really suck, can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like just put one foot in front of the other. Don't think about what it should be at the end, right? Just think about one foot in front of the other, just keep on marching. And that has served me pretty well in life. And since being out of the military and getting into politics and stuff and seeing how the darkness behind the curtain, so to speak, that lesson for me has been invaluable. Like, and so it stuck with me, man. It's just stuck with me ever since.
No, that's amazing. Um, so in the lead up to the withdrawal from Afghanistan, were you paying close attention, or were you like just trying not to, or were you? And I forget because everything's kind of blended together here over the last few years. Were you already in your campaign at that point? But let's say February, March, April of 2021. Are you watching Afghanistan? Are you watching
Oh my
provinces
gosh.
fall? Are you getting into?
Yeah.
Are you so in tune with the news that you're seeing what's
Yes.
on the horizon, and then we get into July and August? Are you watching this whole thing happen? And what are you feeling? Let's say
Yeah.
from February 2021 all the way up until we actually withdraw and everybody's seeing it happen in real time on television.
Yes. So I was at that point, 2020 had come and gone. I'd run for Congress in 2020, unsuccessfully. Stories that I could tell you about that, crazy. But again, like, don't quit, right? Don't surrender, don't quit, stay in the fight. So I turned around and ran for US Senate. And like just immediately, 2 months after my congressional campaign, turn around, declare it was an open Senate seat in Pennsylvania. And of course, again, I was like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, not a whole lot of political experience, was a political outsider in every sense of the word. And not knowing that, running for Congress is one thing. 435 seats, it's competitive in a swing district. Running for Senate, totally different ballgame. 100 seats, 50 of which are held by either party. Every single sinister billionaire in the country and in the world watches every one of those races, especially in a state like Pennsylvania, which is a linchpin for either Republicans or Democrats in a general election or for president. I mean, whatever party wins Pennsylvania tends to be like that party is winning. And so like everything, it's like what happens in Pennsylvania, hundreds of millions of dollars are going to be spent here. And so I wouldn't think about any of that now. Like when I got in, I'm just thinking, hey, open Senate seat, just ran for Congress. It was an amazing experience. And like, I'm turning around and running for Senate. And so we do that and then start watching the news and seeing the writing on the wall and seeing these generals in our country, like these generals, man, like we got a real strategic level officer problem in this country. There are way too many chiefs and not enough Indians, so to speak. So, and see General Milley, look, I don't want to get overtly political with your audience. And I know I don't want to do that, but I see him on Capitol Hill, right? Just at the time where Afghanistan's starting to go south. Right. And as somebody who's been there and spent a lot of time there, you can just kind of sense it talking to people who are coming back, and I'm running for Senate. And so like, I'm kind of in the mix. Right. So I just get the feeling that things aren't going right. And he's up there on Capitol Hill talking about white rage and all this other stuff. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm so tired of this. Like what made my unit so exceptional, Jack, was that like, of course we were diverse. And of course that was a strength insofar as we brought a lot like intellectual diversity, lots of different cultures, lots of different ideas to the table. That made us stronger. But what took us to the next level was our ability to unify beyond those many differences. I've raised my whole life learning in school that America was a melting pot. Not that you have to discard your culture when you come here. No, but you keep those aspects of your culture, but you're an American, right? You love this country. That's why you come here. But that unity is what it's about, not necessarily about diversity. That's only part of the story. It was always our ability to unify beyond those many differences that made us truly an exceptional fighting force. And I see these generals start talking about all this like diversity stuff. And I'm like, it makes me mad because it doesn't matter what color your skin is or what God you worship when you're in the military. It doesn't matter what political party you're in. That shit does not matter at all. You just see these generals talking about it. I'm thinking like, man, they seem to be spending an awful lot of time talking about this and not enough time like focused on what's going on in Afghanistan. And I started speaking out about this and And then Afghanistan collapsed. And I'm like, man, I even said publicly, I think I was on Tucker Carlson's show or something, Jack. I said, listen, it'd be great if General Milley, like, I get it, like he has his political beliefs, I respect that or whatever, but like maybe focus on Afghanistan before it collapses. And then a couple months later, full scale collapse. And it was very, very hard for me. And like as anybody who served there, just because, Jack, you know, it's like we had one really tough deployment, but my soldiers went back again, back again, back again. Guys were promoted. Guys who stayed in went back a lot. And, you know, I ended up to that war losing 30 of my friends over there. And you look at what happened there and you look at the way we left, it really makes me angry. And, you know, you asked about like things from Afghanistan and what I've learned taking forward. That's part of it. Is that I, generally speaking, loathe all politicians. So not, like I said, I don't want to get overtly political, but I think I'm a constitutional conservative. I mean, this is completely out there. I mean, I guess that puts me as a Republican, but I love this country. I don't care. Like, I love America. I love our people. I want this country to survive. I want our kids to have an amazing country. That's why I ran. And when you get these politicians making these decisions on a whim, and this is not like, this is a problem on both sides of the aisle. Getting back to your question about how that experience has shaped me, it's shaped me in that, like, our country's sons and daughters, Jack, are our most precious resources, and they are far too often sent into combat without a clearly articulated mission. They do amazing on the battlefield because the American military is the best the world has ever known. And it's by and large a benevolent force that does a lot of good in the areas that we go. But however, like, talk about all of those experiences in my life that changed me. Every soldier, every SEAL, anybody that's seen the more ugly side of war goes through that metamorphosis. And to put somebody through that as a politician in a suit in an air-conditioned office in Washington and not fully grasp what that means, the real strategic weight of sending our troops frivolously into the fight, man, that has stuck with me. And I'm not saying that today, I am not by any stretch of the imagination anti-war. I completely understand that freedom that we have here in this country, it's not something that is passed in the bloodstream, as Reagan said, from one generation to the next. It has to be fought for. So if this country's freedom was ever put at risk, or there was ever a time that our country was at risk, or a fight that needed to be had, well, I'd be the first in the line volunteering to go. It doesn't matter how old I'd be. But I do reject this groupthink in Washington that somehow going to war is a sign of strength. It's not. Ultimately, it's not. Diplomacy and forward thinking and strategy and doing everything you can to keep our sons and daughters out of the fight to preserve this country. I mean, think about how many people who we lost in support of Iraq and Afghanistan, and how many people, tens of thousands injured, hundreds of thousands, invisible wounds of war, lives changed forever, not just them, their families. And what do we have to show for it in Iraq? What do we have to show for it in Afghanistan? Like, it's hard. And I'm not trying to give people a sense that there's not hope. I mean, we did good things there. I'm proud of my service there, but it's the politicians who screwed it up. And so for now, for me, it's like, I have completely dedicated my life to speaking out about this topic about, yeah, America has to be defended. Yeah, we better have the biggest, baddest military on the block, invest in our war fighters and all that. But we better not be sending people into the fight frivolously, because that is wrong. It's wrong.
Have you read the Afghanistan papers by Craig Whitlock?
Yes.
Amazing.
It is amazing.
Eye-opening.
And what's crazy to me, Jack, and again, I don't
Not surprising, but not surprising. I want to say you won't be surprised by it, but it just confirms what you already know, even if you're just looking at the whole situation logically and objectively.
Jack, it's so true. And like every year in January, the generals, Combined Joint Task Force, whatever, there's a different number every year, issues this report on Afghanistan. And every year it's the same. Mission's on track, totally under control. Afghan National Army is going to be great. And it was all BS. And you think about the way that we promote, it's probably similar in the Navy, but in the Army, it's like, it's all based on like meritocracy, but you do these things like these battlefield update briefs, and like you're all like as a young commander, like assigned. Yeah. The bubs. Exactly. And you're assigned like an area of operation, right? And you don't want to ever go to your commander as a young leader and be like, sir, you can't control this shit. Things are hitting the fan. It's out of control. But no, what it is things are great. Things are wonderful, completely in control.
Progress.
Yeah, every single level, that's the same. Why? Because people want to get promoted. And so what that does is like breed a sense of groupthink that is not healthy in terms of what an end state looks like in accurately assessing the battlefield. Because no general of Afghanistan wants to say, oh boy, this mission is not on track, because guess what? He's not going to get promoted. He's not going to take the next step in his career. So that is in no small part the reason why Afghanistan ended up. I mean, politicians really screwed it up, but it's these ladder climbers in the military, man, that don't give honest assessments. And like, look, man, I got back from Afghanistan, became a captain, rear detachment commander, was medically retired for wounds in Afghanistan. But during that process, I became the rear detachment commander, and it was like my job to notify families of the fallen. Worst job in the world. But I've seen both sides of the fight. I just said to my commander, like, I'm done. Like, my bucket is full. I don't think I'd be doing anybody, even if I wanted to go back to Afghanistan, even if I was medically cleared, I don't think I'd be doing anybody any good. And I didn't like the political games, man. So after like me being a young captain, I'm like, I'm out of here. I can't do it anymore. But you get people that like, I had seen a lot of combat, and a lot of my comrades in arms who saw a lot of combat with me made a similar decision, because they were just like, man, life is short. Like my 9 lives are up. And so what you have is you got this meritocracy that does not breed honest assessments of what happened on the battlefield, combined with the fact of attrition of actual war fighters getting out because they don't want to get killed on another deployment. And you end up being left with these like people who, this isn't like across the board true, but because there are some good officers out there, but you end up left with people who like playing the game, don't see a lot of combat. So I'm just saying that's just the truth, and people might not like that, but it's true,
Gives me a lot to work with in the novels when I'm creating. It's very therapeutic, by the way, to write those things.
No, I'm sure it is.
But and you get to take everybody out at the end, and it's But so when you ran for Senate, I want to ask you before I have to let you go. What do you remember a certain moment when you're like, oh, this is different, or when you were surprised by something that you didn't anticipate as you get in for the right reasons, and then you see this game, you see this curtain pulled. I don't know how far, how open that curtain became for you to see, but even if you just peek, even one eye through a little opening, what was that like? Was there a moment when you thought, oh my gosh, this is not right,
especially for Senate.
This isn't what the American people think is going on.
Especially for Senate. Like, I loved meeting the people of my state. I loved being a representative of the people. And what I didn't realize, what I do now, but didn't realize then, is that Pennsylvania, especially, and a lot of states are like this, they're called like what you call in politics machine states. In other words, like, this is why you get career politicians, because you have people who run for local office, then they run for a higher office, state office. Then they serve in state office for a while, and then they run for federal office. And so like there's like a pecking order, right? And at every level, you're kind of kissing the ring of all the leaders in a state. And anybody who circumvents that process, and there are some leaders that do and do it successfully, but anybody that circumvents that process, especially in a machine state, becomes a target. And I'm sure you're aware of like that, what happened with Carrie Lake and the recording and trying to be brought like that.
I was going to specifically ask you about that. And
that did not surprise me at all. Not because Carrie Lake told me about this conversation. She and I had dinner at CPAC the year before this came out. She told me like that people were talking to her about stuff like this. And I had just withdrawn from a Senate race in Pennsylvania Believe me when I tell you, it happens. And it happened to me, and it's common. Like because you think you have, so I'll just say, like, you get these people that are these billionaires, right? They're all over the world that are paying attention to American politics in the United States Senate because there are only 50 on either party, right? You have a state like Pennsylvania where there's going to be $500 million spent in both this Senate race, this cycle, and for president in one state. So what's, $5-10 million here or there, throwing that money around to keep a candidate out? Be life-changing sum of money for that candidate, right? And what these billionaires do, and this is so true. They're like, it sounds conspiratorial, but these people behind the curtain, it's true. Like, they exist. They're out there. They try to shape the political battlefield like this. And what these people fear, right? They don't care about your political party so much. I mean, look, if they can get somebody who aligns with them politically, great, even better. But what they care about more than anything else, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter, but what they care about more than anything else is control. Can they control this person? And say what you want, like, about President Trump, like that guy, like, people, they can't control him. Democrats, Republicans, people can't control. I mean, that's what people don't like about him too, is he's just like, people feel like he says what he wants. Like, people love that. They don't like that. But Carrie Lake is another one. It's kind of like a political outsider. So my point is, I don't mean just to cite Republican examples, but maybe John Fetterman is a good Democrat example. Like, he's a Democrat outsider as well for the most part. Now, he ran for mayor of Braddock, and then he was lieutenant governor for a while. But, the party establishment certainly didn't like him. And for me, it's like, as an outsider, you end up getting a target on your back when you're uncontrollable. You go around the machine, you don't kiss the rings, and you don't take the bait, And that's when you get the establishment wing of the Republican and Democrat Party coming after you. And that was certainly what it was for me as well in Pennsylvania. So, like, just to give you a sense of what that looked like. Running for Pennsylvania, I'm sure, like, Google my name if you're watching or listening to this. I'm sure you'll see horrible headlines pop up about me, and none of that stuff is true. I've never really even talked about it publicly, but none of it's true. And so I get President Trump's endorsement, obviously running on the Republican ticket. This is in September of 2021. And I get his endorsement. We're already up in the primary in a multiple candidate field by a significant margin. We end up going up 30 in the primary. And I circumvent all the political leaders in the state because my campaign was not powered by big corporations and billionaires. Like, we had over 70,000 small dollar donors that powered my campaign. This is how the founders intended it, by the way. We had the power of the people behind us. And that people, I don't care what anyone says, you get these billionaires, they're afraid of that. They don't want somebody that they can't control. And again, this is true for Democrats and Republicans. So September 2021, I get Trump's endorsement. We go up 30 points in the primary, and we have polling that shows we're up 6 points in the general election on John Fetterman a year before Election Day. That same exact day, Jack, all of my VA medical records leaked to the media and to my donors, along with custody records, things that were sealed, private medical records for my kids. And the media just built this fake narrative that I was some broken, disheveled combat veteran that was angry and had PTSD, and like, none of that was further from the truth. I mean, you know me, Jack. I met you back at Chris Cowell's funeral. I've been a public figure for 10 years before I even ran for political office, ran for Congress in a huge swing district, spoke in prime time at the convention in front of 100 million people. Like everyone knew who I was. And all of a sudden I run for Senate, and all of a sudden, like, all this stuff happened. I mean, it's just like, and it was because I started speaking out against wars, and I said, F you to the people who are trying to get me out. And I can't tell you how many calls that I had with people that are like, I'm not asking you to get out of politics forever. I'm just asking you to maybe wait a couple years. Well, you could do it if you want. Like, nope, I'm sorry. This is what I'm doing. You know, we're military guys. We put our sight on something, we go for it. But I'm telling you, man, like, it was like the moment that it looked like, I mean, because again, like, keep in mind, like, the collapse of Afghanistan was happening all at the same time. I was doing 60 or 70 national media hits, like, in the course of 2 months. So, like, I was an Afghan veteran running for US Senate in a high profile state. So I was everywhere. So there came a point in time where, like, they realized that they couldn't control me, and a switch flipped. And it was just like, from that day on, it was just one fake narrative after the next, totally fabricated, totally built up out of whole cloth. Like, but like, that's how dirty politics is, man. And that's why I look at politicians now and think, like, boy, this country is in real rough shape, because I don't give a damn about Democrat or Republican. We need actual leaders now to pull us back from the brink. We need them. I don't care. Democrat, Republican, you love this country. You want to preserve it for our kids. You're not crazy. Like, you're a leader willing to take bold, decisive action to save this country. Like, I support you, you know, lots of respect for RFK. Don't agree with them on every position out there, certainly as it pertains to, you know, climate change and guns, but he's a guy that I could work with, you know. Tulsi Gabbard's another one. Don't agree with everything she has to say, but she's not crazy. I could work with her on behalf of a grateful nation. But the problem right now that we have in our country is we have too many politicians and not enough leaders, and we have too much money. Billionaires, globalists, like, globalist is a term that's overused, but it's billionaires from all around the world that pour money into these nonprofits, and these nonprofits in America, they're out there not necessarily campaigning for a candidate directly, but campaigning on issues. I mean, it's just caustic to this country. It's destroying this country, man. And I'm telling you, I like, I'm not out of the fight completely. You know, but I left that Senate race because my kids were involved and they needed me, and that was it. And I look back on that and, like, I don't regret that decision at all. At the time, it was the right decision, and my family now is on stronger footing than ever before. But you talk about that lesson of, like, learning to put one foot in front of the other. That was by far, of all the shit that we went through in Afghanistan, notifying families of the fallen when I got home. Like, that was by far the darkest period of my entire life, because everything that was being said about me was a lie. Everything. And there was nothing that I could do about it, Jack. No matter where I went, nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. The media just had a narrative and they ran with it. The truth was not a part of their concern. And their mission was to get me out of that race and, you know, get somebody in there that they can control. And unfortunately, that ended up being what happened. But there are more and more candidates now stepping up that are recognizing the rules of the game, and they're not going to back down. And I think that's a good thing for our country.
Wow. I mean, I was watching the campaign. I was, you know, I could for you. All this momentum.
I remember.
You had all this momentum going. I thought, oh, 100%. There's no, this guy's, he's on his way, and that's who we need in these national offices, like guys like you. And I mean, I just watched it, and, you know, trying to do what I could. But
you texted me when it all went down. You were there for me when it all went down, man. Like, because it was like it happened. Like, it was like, I'm telling you, man, like, I'm telling you, there are powers at play in this country right now, dark and sinister powers. And I've seen them in action. And you could cite specific examples of how, and I see it clear as day now, of how the media and some of these leaders start pushing narratives, and you can see the beginnings of these narratives, and you can see them grow, and they're not in any way based on the truth. And we've got to get back to a point in time in our country where truth comes before narrative. And unfortunately, we're not there yet. But I don't know, man. Like, we have a limited time. To me, I think we have a limited window with which to save this country. That window's closing fast, but it can be done, but it's going to require leadership, man.
Would you ever get back in a race?
I have to. At some point, Jack, I have to. But my kids are so little. They're still little, you know? And it's like, my decision, when that custody order, and we can do a whole nother episode on family court and how that's just insanely corrupt. But you think about what happened. I could give you a sense of the timeline. Haven't talked about this publicly yet either. But so I told you about getting Trump's endorsement in September. So I get this, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which is a 5-2 Democrat supermajority. Now you've seen how the courts are being used in this country now. It's just, it's very, very disconcerting to say the least. And, you know, because I would put forth, now your audience might disagree with me, and I completely respect that, but Republicans tend to appoint to the benches right-leaning jurists who leave their politics at home. The left, they fight to win. They've put hardliners on the bench. And look, you don't have to be a genius. I'm not a lawyer. You don't have to be a legal scholar to know how liberal Supreme Court justices will rule on any politically charged issue. Take Texas, for example, on the border. The Texas Constitution sets forth and empowers Governor Abbott to protect the sovereignty of his state from an invasion. It's right there in black and white in the Constitution of his state. That's what he did, securing his border and protecting his people. I believe that there's a social contract that goes all the way back to the founding of this nation, Jack, that sets forth that the people, and this is goes back to John Locke, right? The people will set aside some civil liberties in exchange for a government that will protect them and the nation from hostile foreign powers or invasions. When the government abdicates that responsibility of, first and foremost, of protecting its people, and I personally believe that federal government should have very limited influence in our lives, but when that social compact is violated, and federal government abdicates its responsibility to protect the people, then the people have a responsibility, and this is in the words of the founders, to overthrow such government. I'm not saying violently, but politically, to replace that government. And people have a right, states have a right to protect their people. And that's what Governor Abbott was doing. And so you see the Supreme Court decision come down. It didn't surprise me. I knew exactly how the liberal justices were going to rule. Because it's never a question on how they rule on politically charged issues. 100% of the time. The right doesn't do that. And so, right just doesn't fight to win. That's the problem. We don't fight to win. And so I get the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, 5-2 Democrat supermajority, especially appoints a judge over my family court case who's not from my area, who's retired and not beholden to the voters, will never run in an election again. The guy also happens to be a Democrat. And if you look at he's described in his voter file as a hard Democrat. So somebody, would you say a 4-4 Democrat means they're voting in every single election cycle, Democrat. So just to give people a sense of how it's played, right? Every judge in my area in Western Pennsylvania, every single one blanket recuses from my case. Pennsylvania Supreme Court, 5-2 Democrat supermajority, specially appoints a Democrat over just my case, just me. And all of a sudden, the ruling is what it is. It's absolutely, thankfully I'm through all that and was vindicated from all that last year. But come on, man. This is, politics is a dirty game. And this is all part of the plan, man. It's all part of the plan. And this is what I was saying before we went live, is that so many institutions in this country are putting themselves before the people and are corrupt. And look, again, this is not a partisan thing. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. I have contempt for them all because their job is to represent the people. And we've gotten away from that, Jack, to where they represent themselves or their bureaucracy. And what you see, a perfect example of this, Jack, is do you remember the VA waitlist scandal where veterans were dying on secret lists at the VA in 2014? Well, the VA, what did they say? The biggest government healthcare organization, bureaucratic healthcare organization in the world. They circled their wagons around the VA. Oh, no. We don't have secret wait lists. We don't do that. Nope. But come to find out, they were lying, and they do. And so what you'll see about these giant bureaucracies, and this is what I say, I don't like a big bloated federal government. I think our country's better without it. But they will not protect the people. They will protect themselves first in the event of a controversy. Self-preservation is what these bureaucracies go for. See it time and again. Look at Pat Tillman. Do you remember what the military said about Pat Tillman at first? Like, oh, he died like an enemy killer, give him a silver star. Like, this is McChrystal saying this, Jack. Well, come to find out that that wasn't true. It was friendly fire. The bureaucracy of the military lied about it to protect what? I don't know. But they lied to the American people. Anytime a government institution lies to the American people, does a grave disservice to we the people. And that's what I don't like. And that's where our country is right now. And it really does worry me for the future of our kids, because the bigger our government gets, I think there's a direct correlation between a large, bloated federal government involved in every aspect of our lives and the diminishing of freedom in every aspect of our lives as well. And as I mentioned earlier, you've been around the world, man. Like, what we have here in this country is special. There's nowhere else to go. And if we lose it here, like, what does that mean for our kids?
Yeah. There's nowhere else to go. And,
nowhere else to go.
And at this point, I'd be on that boat headed there, but there is not. So then it is the last stand. It's tough, man.
It is.
Oh, geez. And before I let you go here, I wasn't going to ask you about this, but it is the story. It speaks to so many different issues, not just in the military, but just in any bureaucracy. When you have people that are out there doing the job in the dirt and the trenches, and then you have senior level leaders, and you have political animals, and you have the dog story from Afghanistan.
Oh God, man, makes me so mad. To this day, just pisses me off.
Yeah,
man.
Me too.
Because you said you got all those deeds. They're just a stupid shit. Excuse my language, but so we're going through it in Afghanistan. Like, we don't have a lot. We had no running water. We didn't have warm shower. I mean, we had warm showers occasionally, but we didn't have running water. I mean, we have to fill up this bin. I mean, we were just out in the middle of nowhere, and we had very few things to cling to.
You have the water buffalo? You have the water buffalo somewhere?
Yeah, yes. And we had this big plastic tub that we'd fill with water that was occasionally filled with water, and then you could take a shower, We had a water buffalo. But so we had these dogs that we just got super close with on the base. And by the way, the dogs in Afghanistan, for whatever reason, just hate the Afghans. I don't know. It's just a thing. But they love Americans. And we had these dogs on our base, and each platoon had them. And we had this little dog named Trigger, and a couple other ones too. And they were just our tether to, I don't know, America, a more civilized world, a different life, a reminder of all that. You'd come back from getting shot up, and these dogs are there happy, waiting on you to see you. It was just a huge morale booster. Well, in Afghanistan at the time, and I think the whole time, there was general order number 1, in that order was no drinking, no porn,
no gambling,
no dogs. And the reasoning behind it is that dogs they could bite you, cause disease, whatever. It was stupid. It's stupid because our dogs, our medic had vaccinated them, given them all their shots or whatever. So we get some battalion brigade medic who comes down on a ring flight. Then he sees that we have dogs, right? And he waits for us to go out on patrol. We go out on patrol, we get attacked, same old. We come back dragging ass, and we're where are our dogs? They're gone. We couldn't find them. Come to find out that this asshole had lethally injected them all and killed them and threw them on the burn pit and burned their carcasses because of general order number 1. And guys were this deployment was one kick in the crotch after the next, but because of stuff like this, not just because of the enemy, but because of the stupid, in the rear with the gear type stuff mentality. These guys that who just and look, everybody, I'm not trying to impugn those guys. They left their families too, but for God's sake, turn a blind eye to it. That they have all their vaccines, but man, that was just part of it, man. It was just crushing for my guys. Crushing.
I know. I think about that story it just anyway, we got a few back. We got a few of those dogs back, and they get turned into military working dogs.
Yeah.
And we got to fly them back, so they ended up in nice homes in the United States. I think
That's great.
That's a good story to have out there someday. That might be a cool, anyway, something to talk about or write about at some point. Because saving the Afghan dogs that were going to get killed by that guy who was stickler for General Order Number 1 or whatever.
It's like there are 1,000,001 stories like this in the military. It's just so stupid. It's beyond comprehension. But sometimes that's just how it is. It's just ridiculous.
So wild. All right. And podcast. So you have 2 going right now. One's the podcast and one's a live show. What do you have going on there?
So I do a live show now. I got kicked off of Rumble after I interviewed Carrie Lake. Or I'm sorry, I got kicked off of YouTube after I interviewed Carrie Lake. My YouTube channel has kind of been nuked a little bit. So now I'm on Rumble now. But the show is called Battleground Live, and it airs every single night at 5:00. So the whole show is about telling the truth and thinking freely and thinking for yourself. And so a lot of these big media outlets, some conservative ones, liberal ones, they are not allowed to talk about certain things. We don't have that restriction and talk about what we want. And it's all in the service of, saving this country and passing off a country to our children that we can be proud of, and building a community doing it, Jack. And it's been amazing. So that's all over on Rumble now. So it's Battleground Live with Sean Parnell. Please follow, subscribe. That'd be great. And I've got the podcast as well, where we just interview people like you. You came on the show once, and we just do a deep dive on their lives and why they did certain things. And so been doing that for a year, and it's been amazing.
Yeah. It's 5 p.m. Eastern time on Rumble.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes, correct.
Awesome. And I know we both got to go, but man, thank you so much, not just for taking the time today, but for your friendship, for having the courage to get in the fight, both in Afghanistan and the political one back here. And man, all the best to you and Outlaw Platoon right here. Like I said, this book right here, really does tell the story, not just your story, but so many, it's the experience of so many people who went out there as whether 01, 02, 03, E1, E2, E3, E4, thrown into this mix, and then went back time and time again. And everybody should read Outlaw Platoon if you want a foundation from which to really understand what people experienced over in Afghanistan at that tactical level. So thank you for writing this book as well, and everything else that you and your guys did over there.
You're welcome, brother. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if people want to find out more about you, we talked about Rumble, we talked about the podcast. It's official Sean Parnell on Instagram. Is there a website as well?
Yes, officialseanparnell.com. I'm at Sean Parnell USA on Twitter as well. But yeah, pretty easy to find out there.
Awesome. And you can follow me at Jack Carr USA on the social channels, officialjackcarr.com. That's the website. Click on shop in the upper right-hand corner for the merch. And if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. Until the next time, take care out there. Stay safe, be strong, keep fighting. You think you know James Reese? Think again. Red Sky Morning available May 14th in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. Everywhere books are sold. Will there be blood? Count on it.